The First World War rapidly evolved into something unprecedented: total war. This meant that entire societies, not just armies, were mobilized for the conflict. Resources were redirected en masse to support the front lines, leaving civilian populations to bear increasing burdens. This was a war fought not just on battlefields, but in factories, fields, and homes. The distinction between combatant and civilian blurred, as the war effort consumed every aspect of national life. Governments asserted unprecedented control over industry, agriculture, and labor. Propaganda became a vital weapon designed to maintain morale and demonize the enemy. Malnutrition and starvation became real threats in blockaded nations, particularly in the Central Powers. The war was literally fought on empty stomachs for many. Millions fled their homes, seeking safety from invasion, starvation, and persecution. Their plight highlighted the widespread suffering beyond the trenches. Posters, films, and newspapers constantly reminded citizens of their duty to the nation. The sinking of vessels, like the Lusitania, though carrying munitions, led to massive civilian casualties. They often handled toxic chemicals, enduring harsh conditions for meager pay. Their contributions were vital, though often overlooked. This act fueled international outrage and highlighted the war's indiscriminate nature. Censorship suppressed dissent and controlled the flow of information, shaping public perception of the conflict. Organizations like the Red Cross relied heavily on female volunteers. They confronted unimaginable horrors with courage and compassion. They knitted socks for soldiers, raised funds, and supported families of fallen troops. Their collective efforts formed a crucial support network. Their entry into heavy industry was a dramatic shift, redefining societal expectations. Women became indispensable to the war effort. Civilian life was profoundly disrupted by rationing and chronic shortages. They worked on farms, ensuring food production continued despite labor shortages. These roles shattered traditional gender barriers. Their visible and vital contributions to the war effort undermined arguments against their political participation. The right to vote was increasingly seen as an earned right. Basic necessities like bread, sugar, and fuel became scarce commodities. Long queues and black markets became common sights in cities across Europe. Many endured the loss of loved ones, the sight of maimed soldiers, and the endless drumbeat of casualty lists. Life itself became a continuous ordeal. Food production plummeted as farm laborers left for the front and supply chains buckled. New forms of warfare, like aerial bombing and submarine campaigns, directly targeted civilian areas. German Zeppelin raids over British cities sowed widespread fear, while many returned to domestic roles after the war. A precedent for female independence and capability had been set. The war irrevocably altered gender dynamics. Though primitive by later standards, these attacks marked a chilling shift in warfare. The Spanish flu pandemic, emerging near the war's end, would claim more lives globally than the conflict itself. Public health systems struggled to cope. Disease also ravaged civilian populations, exacerbated by poor sanitation and weakened immune systems. The psychological toll on civilians was immense, living under constant threat and uncertainty. Refugee crises erupted as fronts shifted and occupied territories endured brutal conditions. The German U-boat campaign, aiming to starve Britain, directly impacted civilian shipping and lives. With millions of men conscripted for the front, women stepped into roles previously considered male domains. In Britain, munitionists worked long hours in dangerous factories, producing shells and other armaments. Women also took on jobs in transportation, operating trams and buses in major cities. The nursing profession saw an immense expansion, with women serving close to the front lines and in hospitals at home. Beyond direct labor, women organized countless volunteer efforts and charities. The war accelerated movements for women's suffrage in many countries. The social changes brought by women's wartime employment were profound and long-lasting. The economic strain on warring nations was unprecedented, pushing economies to their breaking points. Governments borrowed vast sums, accumulating massive national debts that would take decades to repay. The cost of living skyrocketed, eroding savings and creating widespread economic hardship. Ordinary families struggled to make ends meet. War bonds were sold to citizens, fueling patriotic fervor. Free markets were largely suspended in favor of state-directed economies. International trade routes were disrupted by naval blockades and submarine warfare. Self-sufficiency became a critical, yet often unattainable, goal. Coffee from roasted acorns and clothes from paper fibers became common. This reflected the severity of their resource crisis. Factories retooled for military goods, often at the expense of consumer products. Millions of poorly equipped troops were sent to their deaths on the Eastern Front. This fueled immense public anger. This spontaneous uprising quickly toppled the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty. Inflation soared as printing presses churned out money to fund the war. Lenin, who had returned from exile, advocated for an immediate end to the war and a socialist revolution. Governments implemented strict economic controls, nationalizing industries vital for war production. However, it failed to address the pressing issues of land reform and food shortages. Its decision to continue the war was deeply unpopular. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in March 1918, was a harsh settlement, forcing Russia to cede vast territories and resources. It removed Russia from the conflict. This marked a radical turning point, ushering in the world's first communist state. Russia plunged into civil war. This directly targeted American merchant ships supplying the Allies. The German High Command miscalculated, and the return of lost territories if Mexico allied with Germany against the United States. This proved to be the final straw. This provided a desperate, final window of opportunity for the Central Powers to break the stalemate before American forces fully arrived. President Woodrow Wilson was re-elected in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." American public opinion was deeply divided. The threat of war on American soil, combined with continued submarine attacks, galvanized public opinion in favor of intervention. Isolationism rapidly gave way to patriotic fervor. It was a perilous moment for the Allies. This decision would prove decisive in the conflict's final outcome. A Selective Service Act introduced conscription, and millions of young men were trained for combat. The nation geared up for a massive war effort. It added an ideological battle for democracy against autocracy. The balance of power was now decisively tipping. American industry began producing vast quantities of weapons, supplies, and food. They pushed deep into Allied lines, but the momentum was unsustainable. The tide was turning. Financial credit flowed across the Atlantic, bolstering struggling European economies. By summer 1918, American troops were arriving at a rate of 10,000 per day. Their freshness and fighting spirit were invaluable. The concept of total war meant that the nation with the deepest reserves of manpower and industry would ultimately prevail. The Central Powers were on the defensive. He framed the conflict not just as a defense of American rights, but as a moral crusade to make the world safe for democracy. The long, bloody stalemate was finally breaking, though at a tremendous human cost. The end was in sight. This gave the war a new ideological dimension. It shattered any lingering hope among the Central Powers that they could achieve a decisive victory. Their end was now in sight. The sinking of the British passenger liner Lusitania in 1915, with 128 Americans on board, provoked widespread outrage. Germany temporarily curtailed its aggressive tactics. This economic warfare was as devastating as any land battle. The Central Powers faced dwindling resources. Raw materials like coal, steel, and rubber were meticulously rationed and allocated to essential industries. The United States, initially a neutral lender, emerged as the world's leading economic power. European nations were left deeply indebted and economically exhausted. The Tsarist regime, already fragile, faced widespread unrest and disillusionment. Poverty and political repression fueled revolutionary sentiment. Britain's naval blockade choked Germany's access to vital imports, contributing significantly to its economic woes and civilian food shortages. Germany, in particular, resorted to desperate measures like producing ersatz goods from whatever materials were available. The massive expenditure destabilized global finance and trade networks for years to come. The internal pressures of total war, combined with immense military casualties, proved catastrophic for Russia. Russia's industrial base was too weak to sustain a modern war, leading to chronic shortages of weapons and supplies for its soldiers. In February 1917, bread riots in Petrograd escalated into a full-blown revolution. Soldiers mutinied and joined the protesters, refusing to fire on their own people. A provisional government was formed, promising democratic reforms and continued participation in the war. Amidst the chaos, the radical Bolshevik Party, led by Vladimir Lenin, gained popular support with their promises of peace, land, and bread. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks launched a second revolution, seizing power from the provisional government. True to their promise, the Bolsheviks immediately sought peace with the Central Powers. Russia's withdrawal allowed Germany to transfer significant forces from the Eastern Front to the Western Front. For years, the United States maintained a policy of neutrality, despite strong economic ties to the Allied powers. However, German unrestricted submarine warfare began to turn the tide of American sentiment. In early 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, believing it could defeat Britain before American intervention could make a difference. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, a coded message intercepted by British intelligence. It revealed a German proposal to Mexico, offering financial support. Public fury erupted across America upon the telegram's publication. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson addressed Congress, asking for a declaration of war against Germany. Congress overwhelmingly voted for war on April 6, 1917. The United States officially entered the First World War, aligning itself with the Allied powers. American mobilization was swift, though it would take time for its full impact to be felt on the battlefields. Economically, the U.S. entrance brought immense new resources to the Allied cause. Psychologically, the arrival of fresh American troops and the promise of endless reserves significantly boosted Allied morale. The U.S. entry transformed the nature of the war from a largely European conflict into a true global struggle. With Russia out of the war, Germany launched its spring offensive in early 1918, a last desperate gamble on the Western Front. The arrival of the American Expeditionary Forces, though initially small, provided a crucial psychological boost and growing military presence. The combined weight of renewed Allied determination, French and British resilience, and the burgeoning American presence proved too much for the exhausted German forces. The war had become a test of endurance and resources, and the Allied powers, now bolstered by American might, had the clear advantage. The entry of the United States shifted the strategic balance, making a Central Powers victory virtually impossible.